Populism is the demand to be part of politics, what Machiavelli called the great virtue, to belong, to be part, to pursue. Any revival of ethnic or racial understandings of citizenship actually strikes at the heart of the populist. I'm not as old as Frank, but I'm getting on a bit. And I'm quite excited to be around at this moment because I'm an optimist about the huge potential of populism. It really is the greatest political development in generation. But am I so optimistic about the parties and some of the individuals who are routinely described as populist? I do think there are very real dangers, but some get bogged down in a swamp of marginal ethno-nationalism, usually disguised, but pretty badly. It's like someone putting on those Groucho mask, glasses and a big nose. Or the sectarian right-wing online ghettos where worship of the Tate brothers and irrational, even totally mad, made-up conspiracy theories rule the roost. Don't get me wrong, the rise of the populists holds out the prospect of democratic renewal. This is a real historical moment that offers the chance to reconstitute the nation with a renaissance of the great European idea that states and government must be subordinate to and representative of the interests of the people. European political culture, our tradition, our inheritance, indeed our civilization itself is founded on democracy and the freedom to express interest, to demand that institutions of authority are accountable to the public. This is the nation state. All important decisions forming the national interest should be taken by representative institutions controlled by a popular vote, at least with universal suffrage of citizens. Populism is the demand to be part of politics, what Machiavelli called the great virtue, to belong, to be part, to pursue politics, to stand up for your community, your solidarities, to defend and stand up for once normative values such as family life. So this is a constitutional moment, what we are witnessing in the true sense of a word. So populism is about the nature of politics, who participates in politics, for whom political structures are organised, for who controls the territory where you live, the place you're from, in the interests of the people, the public, the citizens who live there. In that sense, it is patriotic and of the nation, the rule of the people, by the people, following the conduct, participation of or in free politics, liberty, with decisions made at the ballot box. Of course, populism is not regarded as such by elites, and as we heard from Frank and other speakers, populism is presented as the rise of ethnic authoritarian nationalism, a dangerous xenophobic drift to whiteness, as one think tank described it after the European elections, the EU elections. In elections after election across Europe, voters are universally signalling their attachment to national politics as opposed to the EU's supranationalism and a hostility to multiculturalism, especially manifest in opposition to unquestioning acceptance of uncontrolled migration. But the populist revolt is not a march to achieve white supremacy. It's actually a backlash against elitist notions of superiority and inferiority, against an elite that places decision-making above the reach of the public, the people, against the treatment of citizens, of us, as uneducated, xenophobic, moral inferiors. What is so striking about the populist revolt, as I've covered it here in this city for 22 years as a newspaperman, despite the roots of some of the parties who have benefited from it in ethno-nationalism, is its civic democratic culture. Voters are backing once fringe parties not to endorse racism or authoritarianism, but to constitutionally ensure that social questions, such as migration, long ignored or dismissed, are dealt with. The elite attempt to racialise, to make ethnic this civic revolt is actually reminiscent of the 1930s. And in this period, politics was redefined by elites as being driven by deeper irrational identification with ethnic or racial groupings, by enmity towards others in a political state of violent nature. So let's talk about migration. Western multiculturalists, who are as obsessed with ethnicity as any ethno-nationalist and the bureaucratic regulation of it, regard Europe's asylum system as an axiom of political virtue. It's a good thing, whatever its degree of dysfunction. Criticism of Europe's asylum seeker, refugee system, whether it's of knife attacks in Mannheim or Solingen or the uncontrolled entry of millions of people over the last 9 years, is equated with xenophobia. You criticise it, you're a xenophobe. It's no longer possible to deny, certainly for many voters, probably most, that European institutions, especially the post-national EU, have failed to sufficiently safeguard, protect or align with the public interest as defined by the public themselves, as opposed to the officials, judges, NGOs or elites. Any attempt to put the national or the democratic first is tarred, it's smeared as xenophobia, as whiteness, as ethnic in character, rather than a civic, democratic impulse. Now, this is nonsense. The EU's migration debate is an overwhelmingly civic, democratic question. It's about control, about who decides who should come and the rules or obligations for people living on a territory that is ruled by and accountable to a nation, a public. Anger at the failures of a system, and they are legion and sometimes deadly, is overwhelmingly directed at political elites, at governments via the ballot box, rather than aimed at migrants as people themselves through violent mob attacks or beatings. One important marker of a civic democratic character to populism is, in fact, the support from many people, citizens, voters, from an immigrant background for control over migration. Support for Alternative for Deutschland is at roughly the same level for voters with an immigrant background, such as Turkish Germans, with backing from between 1 in 5 or 1 in 4, as the party is supported by ethnic white Germans. France has a similar story to tell. According to the rector of a Grand Mosque of Paris, many Arabs back Rassemblement National in the same proportion to the national average. In Britain, one of the key factors in the Brexit vote was British Asians who as British citizens were discriminated against compared to European citizens under the single market's free movement rules. There was a palpable sense of injustice that really did help tilt that vote. It's no surprise that many of those with an immigrant background see citizenship as important, something that's not to be trivialised or undermined by the multicultural fiction that anyone who ends up residing on the territory is as much of a citizen as anyone else, and undermining any sense of national culture is a positive attribute. For many Arabs, Turks, or Asians, the idea that Islam, or rather the ideology of Islamism, should be protected at the expense of democratic values is appalling. This is especially so in terms of the concept of equality between men and women, a universality which is undermined by multiculturalists who argue that exceptions must be made for Islamism, as well, of course, we see the active misogyny promoted by figures such as Andrew Tate, who are sometimes feted by those who call themselves populists. The remigration idea that is prevalent in some quarters of populist parties is, though it is rarely spelt out, a significant problem, or it can be. Most citizens of immigrant origin have become British, French, German or Dutch, as much so as any natives through becoming part of communities, work, raising families, taking part in the political life of that territory, that country, that nation. They are no exception to the political democratic dimension of populism. Much of the remigration concept, in fact, is similar to the multiculturalist ideology in that citizenship becomes reduced to bureaucratic dogma where a grandparent was born, possession of a right piece of paper, whether after all, in the multiculturalist vision of dystopian racial politics, the population is also divided up. A shared civic culture, democratic culture, national culture is replaced by safe spaces, barriers, and the separation of people defined on the grounds of identity. White ethno-nationalists, insofar they exist outside the fevered imagination of elites, are playing a different version of the same divide and rule game. Any revival of ethnic or racial understandings of citizenship actually strikes at the heart of the populist project, which is to renew the meaning of what it is to be a citizen through democratic values and practices. And just to end, I want to stress that this tradition, this inheritance, is a keystone of our civilization. It goes back certainly to Machiavelli in 1517. It is the most important component of all of our different national cultures that at the end of the day have this golden thread running through it, which is this attachment to this tradition and inheritance. And populism is upholding that.